All right, welcome to Talking Investing. I'm Tom, and as always, this is not financial advice. Today, I want to talk about Bitcoin and the Bitcoin miners. This is a weekly update edition. I want to go through what happened last week with Bitcoin and the Bitcoin miners. We did have something new go on last week, so I want to talk about that. And of course, we'll talk about what the setup is for this week. If you're new to the channel, we talk about Bitcoin and the Bitcoin miners all the time on this channel. So if that's content you're interested in, please consider subscribing to the channel. I want to thank everybody. We did just get to 20,000 subscribers. We've been working towards that for a long time. Also, if everybody could do us a giant favor and smash the like button, we're going for 800 likes on this video. So thanks everybody for all your help along the way. Let's get going. Let's talk about Bitcoin and the Bitcoin miners. Okay, the first chart we always look at is the week over week chart for the Bitcoin miners, which includes Bitcoin as well. And I want to show you, this is going to show right away. Something did change last week. We've been waiting for this for basically 3 months. We'll take a look at some charts later that get more in depth on that. But what you're going to notice is for the first time in the year 2024, the Bitcoin miners outperformed Bitcoin, some of them substantially this last week. So that trend has been the opposite for over 12 weeks now. So let's take a look at exactly what happened last week. You're going to see at the bottom, second to last on this list is Bitcoin. Bitcoin was down 7% week over week. That is measuring from the close of the US equity markets from Friday over Friday. So you're going to see every single Bitcoin miner, all but one, beat that last week. So BitDeer was the outlier. It was down 11%. That did worse than Bitcoin. Everything else did better. In a week where Bitcoin was down 7%, some of these Bitcoin miners were off to the races. Two in particular. TeraWulf was up 38% this last week. That was spectacular performance. Cypher was up 31% last week. So those two in particular really had a big turnaround. But there were a lot of other Bitcoin miners in the green. HUT was actually up 16%. Cleanspark was up 12%. They are now the second largest Bitcoin miner by market cap. Iris Energy was up 10%, BitDeer 8%, Marathon was up 8%. They are, of course, the largest Bitcoin miner by market cap. You'll see a lot of these that were anywhere from down 2% to up 2%, so that was a big grouping in the middle. Still, all of those outperforming Bitcoin by quite a bit. So the other one worth noting is RIOT, which is the third largest by market cap. RIOT was the largest by market cap for almost 3/4 of the year in 2023. Marathon passed them. They are now significantly ahead of them, and now CleanSpark has passed them as well. So RIOT was down 2%. But the main takeaway, the most important thing on this chart is that you can see while Bitcoin was 7% in the red, most of the Bitcoin miners were green, and some of them had big up weeks. So we have not seen this yet in 2024. The Bitcoin miners have been lagging substantially. So let's take a look at the next chart, which shows exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, so here's the Bitcoin miners' performance year to date. You're going to see, on this chart, you're going to see is the exact opposite. Bitcoin is the second best performer on this list. Only CleanSpark is up more than Bitcoin year to date in the year 2024. So CleanSpark continues to dramatically outperform the competition. It's up 77% year to date. Bitcoin's up 52% year to date as of the close on Friday. And then you're going to see Cypher up 12% and TeraWulf up 3%. Those are the only other two that are in the red. And if you remember, when we looked at the weekly charts, those had gigantic up weeks this week. So that lifted those two from red to green. All the other Bitcoin miners are still in the red this year, while Bitcoin is up 52%. So you can see Marathon down 11%. That's actually leading the pack out of all the rest of the Bitcoin miners that are in the red. You've got a bunch here down between 25 and 35% in the middle. And then you've got a bunch down over 40% all the way to down 58%. So there are a group of these that are lagging behind dramatically. And I'm going to repeat myself, which I say in every single video. For the last 16 months, I've been really trying to point out the fact that I do think there's going to be winners and losers in the Bitcoin mining industry in this cycle. In previous cycles, all the Bitcoin miners were really to the moon during the Bitcoin bull run. There's a lot more competition. Bitcoin and the Bitcoin mining industry is starting to mature, and some of these companies I don't think are going to make it. And whether that means they go out of business altogether or they just lag so far behind that they're not worthy investments, I think the closer you get to the bottom of this list, you're going to have some companies that do struggle. So of course, this is not financial advice. Only time will tell as to whether or not that's how this plays out. So please do your own due diligence. I'll also point out out, as this chart shows, we also talk all the time about the fact that Bitcoin is a very volatile asset, and the Bitcoin miners are actually even more volatile. So this is a very tricky space to be in. So if volatility is not your thing, this is probably not the right place for you. Okay, this next chart actually goes back just a few days further than the last chart. So this goes back to December 27th, 2023. So this is now a 12.5-week period. About 2/3 of the Bitcoin miners hit a new high for the year 2023 on December 27th. And then since then, it's been rough riding for the Bitcoin miners. So this is now a 12.5-week period that we've been following each week. We really started following this right in the second week. So these trends jump right out at us. And the reason is the same exact thing happened last year in 2023. There was a 14-week period where the Bitcoin miners dramatically underperformed Bitcoin, somewhere between 50 and 70% worse than the performance of Bitcoin. And we're seeing that again this year. In the first chart that we looked at, which was week over week, it did look like we may be starting to turn out of this trend. So we want to see a couple of weeks in a row put together before we can really confirm that this trend has reversed. But last week was the clear first week where the Bitcoin miners outperformed Bitcoin. 18 of the 19 outperformed, and several of them outperformed by 30 or 40% versus the performance of Bitcoin. But still, with all that, with the very good week that the Bitcoin miners had last week, if you look at the last 12.5 weeks, there's only one Bitcoin miner that's even in the green, and that is CleanSpark, up 45%. Bitcoin is in first place on this chart, up 47% in that same period of time. Bitcoin did hit a new all-time high in the middle. We are off of that by almost $10,000 when the market closed on Friday, but Bitcoin has been trading in a range, somewhere between 62,000 and 73,000 for the last month. So that's one of the things that we're going to be looking for. Are we going to stay range-bound, or does Bitcoin break out to one side or the other? Okay, so if we look at this list, you're going to see some of these Bitcoin miners are lagging even further behind. I do think there's some Bitcoin miners that the market has made a decision on. There's still 7 miners on this list that are down more than 50% in this period of time, where Bitcoin is up 47%. Particularly these that are down between 57 and 67%. I think the market is expressing they're deeply concerned about these companies. So again, this is not financial advice, but this is what the market is telling us. A lot of the rest of these are stuck in the middle. Even the ones near the top of this list are still down over 30%. There's only 3 Bitcoin miners down less than 30%. CleanSpark, which is up 45%, Cypher, which is down 12%, and TeraWulf, which is down 15%. And if you remember the chart we looked at first, TeraWulf and CleanSpark had a huge up week this week. So this is what has pulled them above the rest of the pack. They were running really with the rest of the Bitcoin miners up until this week. So this is what we'll be looking to see. Do some of these other Bitcoin miners start to have breakouts to the upside? I am still expecting maybe the top 5 to 8 Bitcoin miners to outperform Bitcoin by the end of the year in 2024. Again, not financial advice. That's my personal opinion, but this is why I look at these lists. Are there companies on this list dramatically underperforming Bitcoin that I think are actually going to catch up and pass Bitcoin by the end of the year? So for me, I think the answer to that is yes. And again, that's why I try and show so many different charts. Every different way that we can look at this obviously helps us try to identify a hidden opportunity in here somewhere. Also, it helps to identify the stocks that maybe we need to stay away from, or that there is some clear red flags. Okay, if we go a little further back in time, most of the Bitcoin miners hit a high for the year in the summer of 2023 on July 14th. So that is now over 250 days ago, and you're going to see in the last 250 days, there's only 4 Bitcoin miners that are in the green. In the period of time where Bitcoin is up over 100%, 112% as of last Friday, there's only one Bitcoin miner that is outperforming that. So once again, this is CleanSpark. So there's a common theme with all these charts. CleanSpark over basically the last 9 months has dramatically outperformed all of the other Bitcoin miners from a stock performance standpoint. So that's another thing worth remembering. This is all the performance of the stocks. So what we're really trying to do is find companies who operationally and or financially are performing very well, but maybe their stocks are lagging dramatically. So if we look at the rest of this list, over the last 250 plus days, Bitfarms is actually the second best performing stock. I note this because one of the main comments that I get is people asking me why Bitfarms is lagging so dramatically all the other Bitcoin miners. And I know that it does seem to feel that way for whatever reason. I do try to point this out from time to time, that sometimes reality does not match perception. And this is one of those instances. Bitfarms is actually the second best performing Bitcoin miner over the last 9+ months. yet it feels like it's stuck in the mud. Now, to some extent, that's because all the Bitcoin miners are stuck in the mud, but it is not underperforming the rest of the Bitcoin miners. You can see it's actually, over the last 250 days, the second best performing miner. Marathon is just behind it at up 15%, and then DMG Blockchain, which is a nanocap stock, is up 7%. So those four, and now I will include Cypher. Cypher is in the red, but is now only down 6%, so this is getting very close to green. So you can see more and more of these are creeping closer and closer to green, and I do think this trend will continue throughout the course of 2024. The question is, do we have more weeks ahead of pain, or was last week the beginning of this reversal that we've been looking for, where the Bitcoin miners start to outperform Bitcoin as they have done historically? Very quickly, just another chart to keep our eye on. This is Bitcoin and the Bitcoin miners versus their high from the peak of the previous bull market, and that was in November of 2021. So you're going to see at one point, Bitcoin did take out its previous all-time high. As of the close on Friday, it was down 7% versus its previous all-time high. Out of the Bitcoin miners, only CleanSpark is even in that neighborhood, down 17%. So these are very, very close. After that, you've got Cypher down 54% in third place. All the rest of the Bitcoin miners are still somewhere between 71 and 99% off of their highs from the previous bull market in November of 2021. And this is not from their all-time highs. Some of these Bitcoin miners were even at much higher numbers than that. So again, this is from their peak in November of 2021. I believe that a lot of these Bitcoin miners are going to end up in the green. So some of these down 70 to 80%. I think will ultimately, by the end of this Bitcoin bull run, end up in the green. So that means there's some significant room to the upside if that's true. Now, again, that is my personal opinion. It's not financial advice. This is where you guys have to decide. This is just another chart to potentially look for some opportunities. Just a super quick look at all the indexes last week. Last week was a very good week. The market really liked what the Fed had to say. The Fed came out on Wednesday. They did not cut rates, but the market liked what they had to say. So you can see the NASDAQ and the S&P continue to run. The NASDAQ up 2.85% last week. The S&P up 2.29% last week. The Dow was up. The Russell was up nicely. We're also measuring against the two largest commodities, which are silver and gold. And then, of course, the two largest cryptocurrencies, which are Bitcoin and Ethereum. So you can see Bitcoin down 7.4% last week. Ethereum down 9.4% last week. So as the market raged, Bitcoin and Ethereum had a little bit of a pullback. But if we zoom out and take a look at this year to date through March 22nd, you're going to see Bitcoin and Ethereum are still dramatically outperforming the US indexes as well as all the rest of the commodities. So Bitcoin up 52%, Ethereum up 45%. It is worth noting the S&P was up just under 10% at 9.7%, the NASDAQ 9.4%. So both of those did hit new all-time highs again somewhere in the middle of the week. They pulled just off of that at the close of the week. So these two major indexes continue to run at or near all-time highs. You'll see at the bottom of this list is the Russell 2000. It is green year to date, but it's lagging significantly the other indexes, up only 2.22%. So this is one of the things that I'm going to be looking at as we go forward. There's 3 or 4 things I'm going to be looking at. I want to go through those next. There's 3 or 4 things that I'm going to be looking at that I think will give us some clues as to where Bitcoin and the Bitcoin miners are headed in the short term and for the rest of the year. So the first one is right here, the Russell 2000. Ultimately, by the end of this year, I actually expect the Russell 2000 to end up being the top performer out of the major indexes in the US, but you can see that has not happened yet, and it's likely not going to happen, maybe, in my opinion, until the second half of the year. Again, this is just my opinion. You guys let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think the Russell is finally going to have its breakout? And the reason that I say that is the S&P and the NASDAQ are basically at or near their all-time highs, whereas the Russell 2000 is still down over the last 3 years. So those are two dramatically different tales. I think we're going to start to see a reversal, but it looks like it may be a little bit later in the year. So I will have my eye on the Russell 2000. The Bitcoin miners tend to follow along with the Russell 2000 more closely than any of the other indexes versus Bitcoin, which sometimes is correlated with the NASDAQ. Now, these correlations can break. They are by no means perfect. It's just something I'm keeping my eye on. Another thing, obviously, to pay close attention to are the Bitcoin spot ETFs. So we did have another change last week. This is the very first time, all 5 days last week, the Bitcoin spot ETFs were in the red, meaning they had outflows. More money left the Bitcoin spot ETFs than went in. Now, the previous week that I've shown on here, I've shown the last 2 weeks on this chart. The previous week, we had the largest inflows in the history of the spot ETFs. Now, when I say in the history, remember, these have only been around for a couple of months. We did have the first $1 billion inflow day 2 Tuesdays ago, and the day after was $683 million inflow. So those were the top 2 days in the history of the spot ETFs. So you can see we had a little bit of a cool off last week with all 5 days being in the red, and you could tell with the price of Bitcoin. Bitcoin, while it has been trading in a range, it was near the bottom of that range. It did pull back around 7%, which makes sense with these outflows last week. So this is the next thing I'll be looking for. Do the spot ETFs flip back into a scenario of inflows? I do expect that that will happen this week, and it's worth pointing out, mainly you'll see 99% of the outflows in these spot ETFs are all out of the Grayscale ETF, which was formerly the Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. So you can see gigantic numbers. On Monday, there was $642 million that came out of the Grayscale ETF. Other than the BlackRock ETF on Thursday, which had inflows of $233 million, it was the inflows that slowed down a bunch this week. These Grayscale outflows have been a continuous thing, but the inflows did slow down last week, causing this net outflow each day of the week last week. So I'm looking for that to reverse this week, get back to a scenario where there's a net inflow of the spot ETFs, even with all 5 days last week being outflows, and somewhere just under $1 billion of money flowing out of the spot ETFs, again, all out of Grayscale. Bitcoin still did not tank. Yes, it was down for the week, but it did stay range bound, so I think that was very encouraging price action from Bitcoin. Lastly, on a side note, in the US, this is a short week of trading. You'll see Friday, March 29th, the market is closed. So obviously the cryptocurrencies trade 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but the US equity markets will be closed this Friday. So just keep that in mind as you trade this week. So that is what is going on with Bitcoin and the Bitcoin miners. If you enjoyed this content, please remember to smash the like button and also consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.